You woke up this morning already tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a bad night's sleep or a brutal week at work. This is something else entirely. It's a heaviness you can't quite name or explain. You've slept enough. You've eaten. Nothing catastrophic happened. And yet, there it is, that familiar, invisible weight pressing down on you before the day has even had a chance to begin. If that sounds like you, I want you to stay right here, because what you're feeling isn't laziness, it isn't weakness, and it most definitely isn't something you need to push through and pretend doesn't exist. What you're experiencing is real. It has very specific causes most people never discover, because nobody ever talks about them honestly. In this video, we're going deep. We're going to uncover why so many people feel chronically exhausted for no obvious reason. We'll explore the hidden emotional, psychological, and even spiritual roots of this kind of depletion. We'll examine the environments you're in, the thoughts you carry, the feelings you've buried, and the patterns you've normalized, without realizing how much energy they silently cost you every single day. By the end, you won't just understand yourself better. You'll know exactly what to do. Summary: unexplained exhaustion is real, valid, and has identifiable causes that go far beyond poor sleep or physical effort. Before we get into solutions, let's talk about something important, something almost nobody admits out loud. Most people who feel this way have already tried the obvious fixes. They've downloaded the sleep apps. They've started the vitamin supplements. They've gone on weekend trips hoping to reset. And maybe those things helped for a little while. But then the tiredness came back. Same weight, same fog, same quiet dread of doing things they used to enjoy. That cycle, trying, feeling better briefly, then crashing again, is one of the clearest signs that the real problem isn't being addressed. And the reason it's not being addressed is simple. We've been taught to look for physical explanations for what is primarily an invisible drain. We check our iron levels and our sleep schedules. We rarely check our emotional environments, our thought loops, or the relationships that are slowly pulling the life out of us. The exhaustion you feel when nothing is technically wrong is often the body's loudest way of communicating what the mind refuses to say out loud. Your body doesn't lie. It keeps the score even when you've convinced yourself everything is fine. Summary: repeated failed attempts at fixing tiredness signal that the real cause is deeper and less visible than physical symptoms. Think about the last time you felt truly, genuinely alive. Not just okay, actually alive. Present, light, energized, excited to be doing exactly what you were doing in that moment. Try to remember it. For some of you, that memory comes quickly. For others, you're searching back years. That gap between when you last felt fully alive and right now tells you something important. Energy isn't just a biological resource like calories or sleep hours. Energy is also the byproduct of alignment. When your life is aligned with your values, your purpose, your authentic self, energy flows naturally. You don't chase it. You don't manufacture it with coffee or motivation videos. It just exists like a river that moves on its own because it's going downhill. But when your life is out of alignment, when you're doing things that don't reflect who you truly are, when you're around people who don't actually see you, when you're spending your days in ways that feel hollow, energy dries up, not all at once, gradually, drop by drop, day by day, until one morning you wake up already exhausted and can't remember when it started. That quiet misalignment is the first invisible drain we need to talk about. Summary: true energy flows from alignment with your values and authentic self. Misalignment drains it silently and gradually. Here's something that might surprise you. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a physical threat and an emotional one. To your brain, a difficult conversation you've been avoiding for 3 weeks feels just as taxing as running a sprint. The anxiety of an unresolved conflict, the constant low-grade worry about money, the feeling of being unseen by someone you love. These things register in your body as stress, and chronic, unprocessed stress consumes enormous amounts of energy. This is one of the most overlooked causes of unexplained fatigue. People assume stress has to feel dramatic to be damaging, but it's actually the quiet background kind of stress, the stuff you've learned to function on top of, that costs the most. It's like having 30 browser tabs open on your laptop. The screen looks normal, but the processor is working overtime and the battery dies twice as fast. You might not feel stressed. You might have even convinced yourself you've dealt with it. But if your body is carrying unresolved tension, physically tight shoulders, a clenched jaw, shallow breathing, that's your nervous system telling you the tabs are still open. Closing those tabs is how you get your energy back. Summary: chronic low-grade stress behaves like invisible background processing. It consumes your energy even when you don't feel stressed. Now here's where it gets personal. Because the deeper you go into this topic, the more you realize that unexplained exhaustion is rarely just one thing, it's a combination. It's the accumulation of 1,000 small energy leaks that individually seem harmless but together hollow you out completely. A relationship that constantly takes more than it gives. A job that uses your hands but not your heart. A habit of saying yes when everything inside you wants to say no. Each of those leaks on its own seems manageable. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. You tell yourself other people have it worse. You tell yourself it's fine, but the leaks keep leaking. And one day, something small, a request, a deadline, a text message, breaks you in a way that feels completely disproportionate. That's not weakness, that's overflow. That's what happens when a cup has been draining for months, with nothing being poured back in. This video is about identifying those leaks, understanding why they exist, and learning how to seal them. Not with willpower or productivity hacks, but with genuine self-awareness and the courage to make real changes. The journey starts with something most of us take entirely for granted: the people around us. Summary: unexplained exhaustion is usually a combination of many small energy leaks. Identifying them is the first step to recovery. There's a certain kind of person who always seems to leave you tired. You can't always put your finger on it. The conversation was fine. Nothing bad happened. But afterward, you feel like you've run a marathon. You need to sit in your car for 10 minutes before you can drive home. Sound familiar? These interactions are so common that psychologists have given them a name: energy-draining relationships. And they don't always involve obvious conflict or cruelty. Some of the most draining people in your life are genuinely nice. They're just relentlessly needy, or persistently negative, or chronically victimized in ways that pull your emotional resources dry without ever giving anything back. The thing about these relationships is that they normalize over time. What started as one friend venting occasionally becomes a daily emotional dependency. What started as a caring family dynamic becomes an unspoken rule that your feelings exist to be managed last. And because these patterns develop slowly, you adapted without noticing. You got good at giving, you lost the memory of what it felt like to be filled up. Understanding energy-draining relationships isn't about becoming cold or selfish. It's about recognizing that your energy is finite and precious, and some relationships are treating it like it's infinite and free. Summary: energy-draining relationships often develop slowly and quietly, normalizing patterns that leave you emotionally depleted. Let's talk about something called emotional labor, because this concept might explain years of exhaustion in a single sentence. Emotional labor is the invisible work of managing your own feelings so that others remain comfortable. It's smiling when you're hurting. It's de-escalating a room you didn't fill with tension. It's absorbing someone else's anger because you've decided, consciously or not, that keeping the peace is your job. Emotional labor is exhausting in a way that's uniquely invisible. Nobody sees it. Nobody thanks you for it. In fact, you often can't even see it yourself because you've been doing it so long it feels like personality. You think, I'm just a calm person. I'm just good at handling people. But underneath that calm is a river of suppressed reactions, swallowed words and feelings that never got to be expressed. People who carry heavy emotional labor loads often describe a specific feeling at the end of the day. Not just tired, but somehow less themselves. Like pieces of them got left in every interaction they managed. And the next morning, before they've even begun again, those pieces haven't come back yet. That's because they can't come back through sleep alone. They come back through honesty, through boundaries, through finally saying what you actually feel. Summary: emotional labor, the invisible work of managing others' comfort, is one of the heaviest and least recognized sources of exhaustion. Now let's talk about people-pleasing. Because it deserves its own conversation. People-pleasing looks like kindness on the outside. It sounds like generosity. Others praise it. But inside the person doing it, people-pleasing, is a constant state of self-abandonment. Every yes, that was really a no. Every reassurance offered from an empty cup. Every time you made yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. The exhaustion that comes from people-pleasing is unique because it carries guilt alongside tiredness. You don't just feel drained, you feel guilty for feeling drained. After all, you chose to help, right? Nobody forced you. So what right do you have to be tired? This guilt keeps the cycle locked in place. You can't rest because rest feels selfish. You can't say no because no feels cruel. So you keep giving, keep performing, keep showing up. And the gap between who you really are and who you let people see grows wider and wider until you wake up one day, not sure you remember who you actually are underneath all the act. Accommodating, people-pleasing is a trauma response for most people. It began as a survival strategy, but somewhere along the way, the emergency ended. And the strategy didn't stop. That's the work. Learning that you are safe now, you don't have to earn belonging by giving yourself away. Summary: people-pleasing is a form of chronic self-abandonment that drains energy and erodes your sense of identity over time. Here's something you need to sit with. The relationships that drain you most are often the ones you feel most guilty, leaving or limiting. That's not a coincidence. It's by design. Not always conscious design, but design nonetheless. When someone has benefited from your unlimited giving, any boundary you introduce will feel to them like a betrayal. And because you love them, their pain becomes your pain. Their disappointment becomes your failure. So you back down, the boundary disappears, and the drain resumes. This is one of the most important things to understand about energy and relationships. Guilt is not always a moral signal. Sometimes guilt is just the feeling of disappointing someone who expected you to have no limits. That discomfort doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It means you've done something new. Learning to tolerate the guilt of a new boundary without immediately breaking the boundary to make the feeling stop is one of the most powerful acts of self-care available to you. It is genuinely difficult. It might cost you relationships that were never actually serving you. But what you gain is something remarkable. You get to start keeping some of your own energy for yourself. And that energy, you'll need it for everything we're about to explore next. Summary: guilt around boundaries is often a conditioned response, not a moral signal. Tolerating that discomfort is essential to reclaiming energy. Now we've covered relationships. But there's another category of energy, doctor, that lives even closer. It lives inside your own head. Specifically, it lives in the neighborhood of overthinking, rumination, and the relentless mental chatter that never fully quiets down. Because here's what most people don't realize. Thinking requires energy, and chronic, repetitive, unproductive thinking requires enormous amounts of it. When you replay the same conversation in your head 17 times looking for what you should have said differently, that costs energy. When you catastrophize about a future scenario that hasn't happened and may never happen, that costs energy. When you lie awake at 3 a.m, mentally rehearsing every possible outcome of tomorrow's meeting, that costs energy. And when you start the next day, that energy is simply gone. You haven't moved, you haven't worked, you haven't done anything visible, but you are depleted. The mind is the most expensive organ in the body. It consumes roughly 20% of your total energy, even at rest. When it is running in overdrive, cycling through worries, regrets, fears, and what ifs, it can consume dramatically more. And all of that happens beneath the surface, invisible to everyone, including yourself, until you notice that you're always tired and can never figure out why. Summary: mental overthinking is an invisible but enormous energy expense. The mind consumes energy constantly, even when the body is still. Let's talk about the specific anatomy of a thought loop, because understanding how they work is the first step to breaking them. A thought loop is exactly what it sounds like. A thought loop is exactly what it sounds like. A thought that feeds back into itself, spinning in circles without ever arriving anywhere useful. It typically starts with a trigger. Something someone said, something you noticed, something you fear. The mind locks onto it and begins processing. So far, so normal. But then, instead of resolve, the thought returns, and returns, and returns again. Each time it returns, it brings a small spike of anxiety, which then triggers more thinking, which triggers more anxiety, which triggers more thinking. This loop can run in the background of your mind for hours, days, or even weeks, all while you're going about your life, answering emails, cooking dinner, pretending everything is fine. The insidious part is that the loop feels productive. It feels like problem solving. Your brain is very good at convincing you that if you just think about it a little more, a little harder, from a slightly different angle, you'll finally crack it. But most thought loops aren't actually solvable through more thinking. They're emotional knots dressed up as intellectual puzzles, and no amount of analysis resolves an emotional knot. Summary: thought loops masquerade as problem solving, but are actually emotional knots. Thinking harder rarely resolves them. So if thinking doesn't solve thought loops, what does? Before we answer that, let's understand why the mind loops in the first place. Here's the truth. The mind creates loops around things it perceives as unresolved threats. It's a feature, not a bug, an ancient survival mechanism. In our evolutionary past, if something in your environment was dangerous, you needed to keep thinking about it until it was either dealt with or gone. Your brain learned to stay alert to unresolved threats because unresolved threats could kill you. The problem is that your brain never updated this software. It still treats an unanswered text message from your boss with the same unresolved threat energy as a predator in the bushes. It can't always tell the difference between a situation that needs more analysis and a situation that just needs acceptance. So it keeps cycling, keeps generating anxiety, keeps consuming your energy, because somewhere in its ancient wiring, it believes that if it thinks hard enough for long enough, the threat will resolve. This is why mindfulness practices work so well for people who overthink. Not because meditation is magical, but because it's one of the few techniques that trains the brain to notice a loop without being pulled into it, to see the thought, acknowledge it, to see the thought, acknowledge it, and let it pass without feeding it another spin. Summary thought loops are rooted in ancient survival wiring that hasn't updated. Awareness, not more analysis, is what breaks them. But let's not only talk about overthinking in the abstract. Let's talk about one of the most specific and energy-draining thought patterns of all: comparison. If you've ever scrolled through social media and felt vaguely worse about your life afterward, without anything bad actually happening, you felt the energy cost of comparison. And in the modern world, comparison isn't occasional anymore, it's constant. It's built into the architecture of every platform you use. Here's what comparison does neurologically. When you see someone else's highlight reel, their vacation, their promotion, their perfectly composed home, your brain processes it as information about your own relative status. And status matters enormously to the human brain for the same evolutionary reasons we just talked about. Lower status meant less safety, less access to resources, less chance of survival. Higher status meant protection. So every time you see something that registers as they have more than me, your nervous system experiences a small but real threat response. Multiply that by hundreds of exposures per day, and you have a constant background hum of low-grade threat activation running through your entire day. You feel vaguely inadequate, vaguely anxious, vaguely behind, and inexplicably tired, and you never connect it to the phone in your hand. Merry constant social comparison activates threat responses in the brain, repeated daily. This becomes a significant and invisible energy drain. There's another dimension of the mental energy drain that almost nobody talks about honestly: decision fatigue. Every single decision you make in a day, no matter how small, costs a measurable amount of cognitive energy. What to eat, what to wear, whether to reply now or later, what to say, whether to say anything at all. These micro decisions seem trivial, but they add up to a staggering cumulative cost. Research has shown that our capacity to make good decisions deteriorates as the day progresses, precisely because each decision depletes a limited cognitive resource. By the time you get to evening, many people are running on fumes, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer volume of choices they've navigated. They feel irritable, foggy, disengaged. They make impulsive choices they regret. They reach for their phones and scroll for an hour instead of resting. And the modern world is relentless in its demands on this resource. We are asked to make more decisions in a single day than our great-grandparents made in a month. Every notification is a micro decision. Every option on a menu is a micro decision. The noise of modern life is, among many other things, a decision factory, and most of us are walking around with the factory running at full capacity from the moment we wake up. Summary decision fatigue is real and accumulates across the day. Modern life demands far more decisions than we were evolutionarily designed to handle. Before we move into the next layer of this conversation, I want you to pause for a moment and consider something. Everything we've covered so far, the draining relationships, the emotional labor, the people-pleasing, the overthinking, the comparison, the decision fatigue, none of these things require anything dramatic to happen. No tragedy, no trauma, no crisis. Just the quiet accumulation of ordinary life, lived slightly out of alignment with slightly too many leaks and not enough refilling. That is the unseen epidemic of our time, not a deficiency of resources. Most people reading this have more material comfort than any previous generation in history. But an epidemic of quiet depletion, of people who look fine on paper but feel hollow inside, who have everything they're supposed to want and still wake up exhausted. Who can't justify feeling this way, so they feel guilty about it on top of everything else. If this is you, you are not broken. You are not ungrateful. You are not weak. You are a human being whose energy has been quietly redirected away from yourself for a very long time, and the path back to yourself starts with something we haven't talked about yet. It starts with your body, not just your mind and not just your relationships. Your actual physical body and the emotions it has been storing. Summary: the modern epidemic of exhaustion requires no tragedy. It accumulates through ordinary misalignment, and it is not a personal failure. Your body is not just a vehicle for your brain. It is an intelligent, living archive of every experience you've ever had, every moment of fear that was never fully released, every grief that was swallowed instead of expressed, every rage that was suppressed because it wasn't convenient or safe to feel it, every time you held your breath and told yourself you were fine. Your body stored all of it, not as memory, as tension, as restriction, as a low-level bracing that became your baseline. This is not poetic metaphor. This is physiology. When you experience a strong emotion, your nervous system prepares the body for action. Muscles tighten, breathing quickens, heart rate elevates. If that emotion is expressed and resolved, if you cry, move your body, shake it out, speak it, process it, the nervous system resets. The tension releases. The tension releases. Energy flows freely again. But when emotions are suppressed, which most of us were taught to do, starting in childhood, that physiological preparation never completes. The tension stays. The restriction stays. The nervous system never fully resets. And over time, you carry this accumulated incomplete charge in your body, always slightly activated, always slightly braced, always using energy just to maintain the suppression. That is what exhaustion without cause often feels like from the inside. Summary: the body stores unprocessed emotions as physical tension. Suppression prevents the nervous system from resetting, creating ongoing energy drain. Let's talk about childhood for a moment, because for many people, the roots of their depletion go back further than they realize. If you grew up in an environment where your emotions weren't welcome, where crying was weakness, anger was dangerous, sadness was inconvenient, sensitivity was mocked, you learned very early that certain parts of yourself needed to be hidden. You learned to perform, to show only the emotions that were acceptable, to be the version of yourself that kept things smooth, that didn't ask for too much, that managed everyone else's reactions without being a burden. And you were probably praised for it. She's so mature. He never complains. They're so easy. These were compliments, but they were also the world telling you, stay hidden, keep suppressing. You're doing great. Keep going. Fast forward 20 or 30 years, and that child who became excellent at suppressing, hiding, performing is now an adult who wakes up exhausted and can't figure out why. The adult has forgotten the performance is a performance. It has become identity. But the body, remember, the body has been carrying the weight of all those hidden emotions for decades, and it is tired. This is not about blame. Your caregivers did what they knew, but understanding the origin of your suppression is the beginning of releasing it. Summary: many adults carry decades of suppressed emotional patterns learned in childhood. The body holds this history and pays an ongoing energy cost for it. One of the most common patterns among chronically drained people is something called emotional bypassing. And it's worth understanding because it's subtle and it disguises itself as strength. Emotional bypassing is when, instead of feeling a difficult emotion, you intellectualize it, you analyze it, you understand why you feel that way without actually feeling it. You might even talk about it to a friend, a therapist, in a journal, in a way that sounds very insightful but never quite drops out of your head and into your body. It sounds like, I know I felt abandoned when my father left, and I understand it's because he had his own unresolved trauma, and I've done a lot of work on this, and I think I've mostly processed it. And all of that might be entirely true. But if your shoulders still hitch upward when someone leaves a room without saying goodbye, the body knows there's more to process than the mind has accessed. Emotions are not thoughts about feelings. They are physical events that need to complete. They need to move through the body, not just the mind. And until they do, they cost you energy, silently, constantly, without your conscious awareness. The gateway back is learning to feel, not just understand, to drop from your head into your chest, to let the body say what the mind already knows. Summary: emotional bypassing, intellectualizing instead of feeling, prevents emotional completion and maintains a silent energy drain in the body. Now here's a con. Except that might reframe everything you've thought about rest. Most people think of rest as the absence of activity. You stop doing things, you rest. But genuine restoration isn't about doing nothing. It's about engaging in activities and states that actively replenish your particular nervous system. And what replenishes one person can actually drain another. For highly sensitive people, introverts, or those carrying heavy emotional loads, social activity, even enjoyable social activity, can be depleting. This doesn't mean something is wrong with them. It means their nervous system processes experiences at a greater depth, which requires more recovery time. For these individuals, the idea that they should get out more to feel better often backfires. They need solitude. They need silence. They need time with themselves that isn't productive. Meanwhile, for someone who has been isolated, whose tank drains through loneliness and disconnection, that same solitude would be devastating. They need contact. They need warmth. They need to feel that they exist in the eyes of someone who sees them. The point is that rest is not one size fits all. And if you've been trying to rest in ways that don't suit your particular nervous system, you've been confused about why you still feel tired after what looked like a perfectly good weekend off. Knowing your type of rest changes everything. Summary: rest is not simply the absence of activity. True restoration must match your nervous system's specific needs, and not knowing your type keeps you depleted. Let's now go somewhere that some of you might not have expected this conversation to go. Because once you've explored the relational, mental, and somatic causes of exhaustion, there's a dimension that many people quietly sense but rarely say out loud. The spiritual one, and I'm not using spiritual in any dogmatic sense. I mean the deep interior sense of meaning, connection, and purpose. The part of you that needs more than just function to feel alive. When that part of your life is empty or neglected, a specific kind of exhaustion sets in. It's not quite sadness. It's not quite depression. It's closer to a feeling of going through motions, of doing things without knowing why, of being technically alive and functionally present while simultaneously feeling like something essential is absent, like the lights are on but nobody's home. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that the deepest human need is not pleasure or power or even connection. It is meaning, and that when meaning is absent, people become susceptible to a kind of existential exhaustion that no amount of sleep or vacation can touch. He saw it in people who had survived extreme suffering. But you can also see it in people who are perfectly comfortable, perfectly safe, and yet perfectly hollow. Summary: spiritual and existential emptiness creates a unique kind of exhaustion that is immune to physical rest. Meaning is a fundamental human energy source. The loss of meaning rarely happens overnight. Like so many of the things we've talked about, it happens gradually. You had a dream once, something you wanted to become, somewhere you wanted to go, someone you wanted to be. And then life happened. Responsibilities accumulated, practical decisions layered on top of each other. You made sensible choices. You were responsible, You did what was expected. And you told yourself you'd come back to the dream later. Later became next year. Next year became someday. Someday drifted into a quiet background ache that you've mostly learned not to think about because it hurts. So now you wake up in a life that looks fine, a life that functions, and wonder why you feel like you're sleepwalking. This isn't failure. The cost of an unlived life. The energy you would have poured into that dream didn't disappear. It inverted. Instead of feeding you, it became a low-level grief that drains you. The unlived life is heavy to carry, not because it's a burden exactly, but because the weight of what didn't happen creates a specific kind of quiet sorrow that manifests as fatigue. Reconnecting with meaning, even in small, humble, everyday ways, is one of the most powerful, re-energizing forces available to a human being. Summary: the gradual abandonment of dreams and purpose creates an unlived life brief, a quiet sorrow that manifests as unexplained exhaustion. Purpose doesn't always announce itself dramatically. It doesn't always arrive as a grand revelation or a burning calling. For most people, reconnecting with purpose is quieter and more intimate than that. It's the thing you were doing when you forgot to check your phone. The conversation that left you feeling more yourself, not less. The work, paid or unpaid, that made you feel like the hours were well spent, regardless of whether anyone was watching. Paying attention to those signals is a form of spiritual intelligence. It's the practice of noticing what genuinely feeds you versus what merely occupies you. And it requires a degree of stillness, a willingness to sit with yourself long enough that the quiet voice beneath all the noise has a chance to be heard. Many people are so afraid of that stillness that they fill every available moment with noise, podcasts, scrolling, background TV, constant busyness. Not because they're lazy or shallow, but because the stillness surfaces feelings they haven't had the tools to process. The unresolved grief, the abandoned dream, the question they're afraid to answer. Is this really the life I want? That fear of stillness is itself a significant energy drain. Because avoiding something has constant, continuous effort. And that effort, quiet, invisible, relentless, is yet another tab left open in the background. Summary: purpose reconnection requires stillness, and the chronic avoidance of that stillness is itself a hidden energy cost. We haven't talked yet about one of the most physically and neurology depleting forces in modern life: chronic digital overstimulation. We live in an attention economy, a world that has been engineered at extraordinary expense and sophistication to capture and hold your attention as long as possible. Every notification, every scroll, every autoplay video is the product of billions of dollars in research aimed at hijacking your dopamine system and keeping you engaged past the point where engagement serves you. And it works spectacularly. Most people spend between 4 and 7 hours per day in some form of screen-based consumption. That's not neutral time. That's time in which your brain is being constantly stimulated, constantly micro-rewarded, and constantly pulled forward by the next piece of content before it has had a chance to process the last one. The nervous system never gets a gap, never gets silence, never gets to reset. What's happening beneath the surface of all that scrolling is a kind of neurological overload that masquerades as relaxation. You feel like you're resting. You're lying down, you're not doing anything, but your brain is working harder than it would during a slow walk outside. The visual stimulation, the emotional arousal, the constant micro-engagement are all consuming neurological energy at a rapid rate. And at the end of it, you put the phone down, feeling more tired than when you picked it up. Summary: digital consumption is not passive rest. It is active neurological overstimulation that depletes the brain while simulating relaxation. There's a specific phenomenon that researchers call attention residue. And once you understand it, you'll see it everywhere in your daily life. Attention residue refers to the cognitive cost of task switching. Specifically, the part of your attention that remains stuck on a previous task, even after you've moved on to the next one. Every time you jump between tasks, you leave a piece of your attention behind. And that residue accumulates throughout the day, degrading your ability to focus, process, and feel present. In the age of smartphones and constant notifications, most of us are switching tasks dozens of times per hour. You're working, then checking a message, then back to working, then scrolling, then a quick email, then back to the task. Each switch is cheap individually. Collectively, they create a thick fog of accumulated attention residue that makes you feel like you're simultaneously trying to do everything and unable to do anything fully. This is why many people describe finishing a full workday and feeling not just tired, but strangely unsatisfied, as if they worked hard, but nothing actually got done. That's attention residue. The work got done, but it got done in fragments, none of which ever received your full, clean, uninterrupted focus. And fragmented work is significantly more energy intensive than focused work. For a less satisfying result, protecting your attention is not a luxury. It is a survival strategy for your energy. Summary: attention residue from constant task switching drains focus and creates a pervasive fog. Protecting attention is essential to energy preservation. Now, here's something important that often gets overlooked in conversations about technology and exhaustion. It's not just the stimulation that drains you, it's the content. Specifically, it's the constant involuntary exposure to the world's suffering, outrage, conflict, and dysfunction that comes with being connected to global media 24 hours a day. The human brain was designed to manage the emotional scope of a village, to care for and respond to the needs and feelings of perhaps 100 to 200 people at most. That's the cognitive bandwidth we evolved with. Now we are exposed to the suffering of millions daily in high definition, in your pocket, any hour of the day or night. This doesn't just make you sad, it activates your empathy systems beyond their design capacity. It creates a condition researchers call compassion fatigue, the emotional exhaustion that comes from being exposed to too much suffering without the ability to help or respond meaningfully. You feel it, but you can't do anything, and you can't look away, and you consume more, and you feel worse, and you consume more again. It's a loop of vicarious suffering that has no outlet and no resolution. The cost to your energy is substantial, and it's compounded by guilt. The guilt of caring about your own well-being when the world seems to be on fire. Summary: constant exposure to global suffering overwhelms our evolved empathy capacity, creating compassion fatigue, a major and often unacknowledged energy drain. Let's change the tone slightly here, because I want to offer you something. Not a technique or a hack, something deeper than that, a perspective. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when you're feeling depleted isn't to add something to your routine. It's to remove something, to stop doing the things that cost energy before trying to generate more of it. This is counter to how most of us approach the problem. When we're tired, we tend to look for what we can add: a better morning routine, a new supplement, a different diet, a gratitude practice. These things can help, but they are filling a bucket that still has holes in the bottom, and filling is always go. Ancient to be less efficient than sealing the leaks first. The most powerful question you can ask right now, genuinely, honestly, without flinching, is this: what am I doing, tolerating, or maintaining that is costing me the most energy? Not what should I add? What should I stop? What relationship needs to end or change? What commitment needs to be released? What story about yourself needs to be retired? What obligation have you inherited from fear or guilt that never actually belonged to you? The answer to that question honestly faced is where your energy lives. Summary: real energy restoration often begins not with adding new practices, but with identifying and removing the greatest sources of ongoing drain. Healing is not linear. It does not move in a straight line from depleted to restored. It spirals. You'll feel better, then encounter something that pulls you back. You'll make progress, then fall into an old pattern. You'll have weeks where the fog lifts completely and weeks where it settles back in. This is not failure. This is the actual shape of genuine healing. And understanding that shape protects you from one of the most common and devastating obstacles to recovery: the shame of relapse. When people believe healing should be linear and it isn't, they use the setbacks as evidence against themselves. I've been working on this for months and I still feel terrible. I must be broken. I must not be doing it right. And that shame, the shame of not healing quickly or correctly, adds another layer of energy drain on top of everything else. You're now not just depleted, you're depleted and ashamed about being depleted. Instead, try to think of your healing as a tide. Tides go in and out. When the tide goes out, it doesn't mean the ocean is broken. It means this is how oceans work. You're going to have out tides. You're going to have in tides. The work is to trust the overall direction, not to demand that every day is better than the last. Summary: healing is spiral, not linear. Understanding this prevents the shame of setbacks from adding another layer of depletion to the process. Let's talk about one of the most quietly overlooked contributors to depletion: the stories we carry about ourselves, not our circumstances, our stories. The narratives we've internalized about who we are, what we deserve, what's possible for us, how people see us. These stories, often formed in childhood, often formed through pain run, silently beneath every decision, every interaction, every morning we wake up already braced. Some of the most draining self-stories include: I'm too mad. I'm not enough. If I stop being useful, people will leave. I have to earn my rest. Other people's needs are more important than mine. I don't deserve to take up space. These stories are exhausting not because they're unusually dramatic, but because they're constant. They run like operating system background processes, invisible, automatic, consuming energy without your conscious participation. What makes self-stories so insidious is that they feel like facts. They don't feel like narratives. They feel like reality. You don't notice yourself believing, I have to earn my rest, because it doesn't show up as a thought. It shows up as the inability to relax even on your day off. It shows up as reaching for your phone the moment you sit down. It shows up as the faint anxiety that exists whenever you're not being productive. The story is the drain. Rewriting the story is the restoration. Summary: internalized self-stories function like hidden operating system processes, constant, automatic, and consuming energy without conscious awareness. Changing a self-story requires more than positive thinking. I want to be very honest about that. Because the self-help world has done a disservice to millions of people by suggesting that if you just think more positively, the old story will fade away. It won't. Not because you're not trying hard enough, but because the story lives in deeper architecture than the conscious mind. Self-stories live in the nervous system. They live in the body. They were learned through experience, and they are changed through experience, not through mantras recited in the mirror. They are changed through the lived experience of doing things the old story said were impossible or unsafe. Every time you rest without earning it, The I have to earn my rest story weakens slightly. Every time you say no without catastrophe following the peep, lay will leave if I stop being useful story loses a little of its grip. This is why building new self-stories is slow. It's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because the nervous system requires repetition of new experiences before it updates its operating instructions. It needs to feel safe, not just hear that it's safe, but feel it over and over until the new pattern is more established than the old one. That takes patience. That takes compassion. That takes being willing to be a beginner at your own life. Summary: self-stories are stored in the nervous system and changed through repeated new experiences, not through positive thinking alone. There's a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on new experiences, thoughts, and behaviors. For a long time, scientists believed the brain was fixed after a certain age. We now know this is wrong. The brain retains plasticity throughout life. It can form new neural pathways. It can diminish old ones. It can literally reshape its own structure in response to changed patterns of thought and behavior. This is profoundly hopeful for anyone who has been trapped in patterns of depletion anxiety, overthinking, or self-defeating stories. You are not permanently wired this way. The patterns that are draining your energy are patterns, not destiny. They were formed, and what was formed can be reformed. But neuroplasticity requires consistent practice. The brain rewires itself through repetition. One meditation session doesn't create a new neural pathway any more than one workout creates muscle. It's the daily return to the practice, imperfect, brief, sometimes reluctant, that accumulates into genuine change. The mornings you barely manage 5 minutes of stillness still count. The moments you catch yourself in a thought loop and redirect still count. The times you choose rest without justifying it still count. They are all deposits into a new neural account. Summary: neuroplasticity means lasting change is possible at any age, but it requires consistent, repeated practice rather than isolated efforts. We're approaching the final part of our journey together, and I want to be genuinely direct with you about what comes next. Because there's a moment in every conversation like this, a moment where the awareness of what's wrong becomes clear, and the temptation is to immediately reach for a list. Give me the 10 steps. Tell me what to do. Give me the protocol. I understand that impulse completely. It comes from the same place as everything else we've talked about. The deep human need to feel agency, to feel that there's something you can do to make the pain stop. And there is. There genuinely is. But the doing in this case has to be preceded by a willingness to stop, to pause, to simply be with the reality of where you are without immediately trying to fix it. Because here's the paradox at the heart of healing from depletion. If you attack your exhaustion with the same relentless productivity and urgency that helped create it, you will stay exhausted. The cure cannot be administered in the language of the disease. Recovery from depletion requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself, not a new series of tasks to add to an already overloaded day. What's needed is not more effort. What's needed is a different quality of attention, directed, finally and fully, toward yourself. Summary: sustainable recovery requires a shift in how you relate to yourself. Not more effort, but a genuinely different quality of self-directed attention. So what does rebuilding actually look like in practice? Let's get specific. The first and most fundamental shift is learning to listen to your body before it screams at you. Most people only hear their bodies when they become impossible to ignore. When the headache becomes a migraine, the fatigue becomes illness, the anxiety becomes a panic attack. By that point, the body has been trying to communicate for weeks or months. and you've been overriding it. Rebuilding begins with lowering the threshold of attention, learning to notice the whisper before it becomes a shout. This means checking in with yourself during the day, not in a complicated or time-consuming way, just pausing several times a day and genuinely asking, how am I actually feeling right now? Not how am I performing? Not how do I look? How do I actually feel? Is there tension somewhere? Hunger, tiredness, a quiet feeling of dread and unexpected lightness. These signals are information your body is always communicating. Rebuilding means beginning to listen. The second shift is learning to honor what you hear. Listening without acting on the information is only marginally more useful than not listening at all. When your body says it's tired, giving it 5 more minutes isn't the practice. Giving it genuine rest is. When your body says something feels wrong, not overriding that signal with logic is the practice. Summary: rebuilding begins with listening to the body before it reaches crisis and honoring what you hear with genuine responsive care. The third shift is rebuilding your relationship with nourishment. Not just food, though that matters, but the broader category of things that genuinely fill you. Joy, beauty, laughter that comes from the belly, time in nature, creative expression, physical movement that feels good rather than punishing, deep, unhurried conversation with people who see you. Most depleted people have quietly rationed their nourishment. They've decided, consciously or not, that there are more important things, that the meeting is more urgent than the walk, tea, that the obligation is more pressing than the creative project, that everyone else's needs are more immediate than their own quiet longing for beauty or play or rest. And so the nourishing things get postponed, then canceled, then quietly given up on as luxuries that aren't practical, until the tank is empty and you're running on the fumes of obligation and habit. Nourishment is not a luxury. It is maintenance. It is the fuel that sustains your capacity to give, to function, to create, to love. Restoring your access to it isn't selfish. It is the exact prerequisite for being genuinely useful to anyone, including yourself. The plain safety demonstration had it right. Put your own oxygen mask on first. Not because you matter more than others, but because you can't help them if you've already passed out. Summary: restoring access to genuine nourishment, joy, beauty, play, creativity is not a luxury, but an essential maintenance requirement for sustainable functioning. The fourth shift is the one that requires the most courage. Beginning to say the true thing, not the diplomatic thing, not the conflict avoiding thing, not the conflict avoiding thing, not the version that manages everyone's reactions before your own feelings have even been acknowledged. The true thing. What you actually feel, what you actually need, what you actually cannot continue to do without cost to yourself. This doesn't mean becoming brutally blunt or abandoning kindness. Truth and kindness can coexist beautifully. But for people who have spent years suppressing, managing, performing, and accommodating, the gap between their diplomatic truth and their honest truth can be vast. And that gap is expensive. Every time you say, I'm fine, and you're not, you pay a small energy cost for the performance. Every time you agree to something that violates your real needs, you pay an energy cost for the betrayal of yourself. Beginning to close that gap, slowly and perfectly, in small ways, before large ones, is one of the most genuinely energizing things a chronically depleted person can do. Not because honesty is always easy or comfortable, but because it is real. And reality, even when it's difficult, is infinitely less exhausting than the performance of a version of reality that was never actually true. Summary: closing the gap between diplomatic and honest expression is one of the most energizing acts available. The performance of false okayness has a constant energy cost. The fifth shift, and perhaps the most beautiful, is learning to receive. Not just to give, not just to function, not just to be useful, but to receive. To accept care when it's offered without deflecting it. To allow yourself to be seen without immediately performing composure. To let beauty land instead of processing it and moving on. To accept kindness without immediately calculating how to return it. To sit with something good long enough to actually feel it. Chronically depleted people are often extraordinary givers and profoundly uncomfortable receivers. They've built their identity around what they offer, not what they allow in. And this creates a one-way flow of energy that is ultimately unsustainable. A heart that only pours out and never allows itself to be poured into eventually runs dry. Not because it was bad or weak or insufficient, but because that's physics, that's nature. That's how it works for everything from water to love. Learning to receive with grace, with genuine openness, without the guilt or discomfort that says you don't deserve it, is a profound act of healing. It is also paradoxically one of the greatest gifts you can give to the people who love you, because it allows them the joy of truly contributing you, rather than watching you deflect everything they try to offer. Summary: learning to receive care and nourishment with openness completes the energy circuit. Chronic one-directional giving inevitably leads to depletion. We're near the end now, and I want to bring this full circle. Because everything we've talked about today, the draining relationships, the emotional labor, the suppressed emotions, the overthinking, the digital overload, the lost meaning, the self-stories, the refusal to nourish yourself, all of it traces back to one underlying truth that I want to leave with you clearly. You were not designed to run on empty. You were not built for constant output without input. You were not created to endure indefinitely without replenishment. The exhaustion you feel, especially the unexplained kind, the kind that persists despite rest, is not a character flaw. It is not evidence of inadequacy. It is not something you need to push through or apologize for. It is a signal, one of the most important signals your entire system knows how to send. And that signal says, something needs to change. Something needs to be released. Something needs to be retrieved. Something that was yours has been given away or suppressed or forgotten. And your whole self, your body, your mind, your heart, your spirit is asking you to remember it. The exhaustion is not your enemy. It never was. It is your most loyal messenger, the one who refused to stop knocking even after you'd spent years pretending not to hear. Summary: unexplained exhaustion is not a flaw, but a signal, your whole self asking you to remember what was lost and return to what is real. So what do you do with everything you've heard today? You don't do it all at once. That's the first thing. You're not leaving this video to overhaul your entire life in the next 24 hours. That approach will only add to the depletion. Instead, carry this conversation with you. Let it percolate. Let it illuminate things you've been half noticing but not quite naming. Let it give you language for feelings that have been floating, unnamed and unaddressed, somewhere beneath the surface. Then choose one thing, just one relationship to reconsider, one boundary to experiment with, one habit of suppression to gently start releasing, one digital pattern to interrupt, one story about yourself to question, one kind of nourishment to restore, one moment of stillness to practice today, not perfectly, not dramatically, just genuinely. Because healing from depletion is not a project you complete. It is a practice you return to. It is the ongoing, lifelong commitment to taking yourself seriously, not in an egotistical sense, but in the most fundamental, loving sense. To say to yourself what you have perhaps never quite managed to believe: I matter. My energy matters. My well-being is not a reward for sufficient productivity. It is a birthright, and it is worth protecting. Summary: the path forward begins with one small, genuine change. Healing depletion is a lifelong practice of returning to yourself, not a project to complete. Before I close, I want to acknowledge something. If you've watched this entire video, there's a reason. People don't spend this much time with a topic they don't recognize in themselves. You've been here, present, through every section: the relationships, the body, the mind, the spirit, because some part of you saw your own reflection in it. And I want to honor that. It takes something to look at this honestly. It takes something to sit with. The uncomfortable possibility that you've been running on empty longer than you admitted. It takes courage to even begin to consider that you deserve more than you've been giving yourself. And you are here. You watched, you listened. That already means something. The version of you that woke up this morning already tired, that person brought you here. And that person is wiser than they know, because they understood, in whatever quiet way these understandings arrive, that the way things have been does not have to be the way things always are. You are not permanently depleted. You are not fundamentally broken. You are a person who has been pouring from a cracked vessel, and now you know where some of the cracks are. That knowledge, held with patience and gentleness and real commitment to yourself, is the beginning of everything. Summary: the willingness to watch and reflect is itself an act of courage. Recognizing your depletion is the first and most essential step toward genuine restoration. And so we arrive at the end, but I want you to think of it as a beginning, because that's what genuine self-understanding always is. Not a destination you reach and stay at, a threshold you cross, and then step through into a different relationship with yourself and your life. Everything we've explored today is connected. The draining relationship and the lost meaning, and the suppressed emotion, and the overthinking, and the digital fog, and the self-stories that said you didn't deserve better. They're not separate problems requiring separate solutions. They're different expressions of the same underlying reality. A self that has been running without adequate care for a long time. And the restoration of that self, the gradual, patient, compassionate work of closing the leaks, honoring the signals, nourishing the needs, and returning to alignment. That work doesn't happen all at once. That work doesn't happen all at once. But it can start today. It can start in the next 5 minutes, with one breath taken deliberately, one choice made from self-respect rather than fear. One moment of genuine stillness in which you allow yourself to simply be what you are: tired, hopeful, imperfect, alive. You are worth the effort of your own attention. You always have been. And somewhere beneath all the exhaustion, the part of you that knows this has been waiting patiently for you to remember. It's time to come home to yourself. The energy you've been searching for was never as far away as it felt. It was right here, waiting for you to stop looking everywhere else. Summary: every insight from this journey connects to one truth: you deserve your own care. Restoration begins now, in this moment, with one genuine act of returning to yourself.